What's up, guys? My name is Your Heroes, and welcome back to more Gates of Hell. Now, I have some wee bit of exciting video today, and that is because we are doing a tier list. And this is a new video idea that I thought I might do for Gates of Hell, depending on the topic. And I thought I'd start off with quite an easy kind of topic to start off with Gates of Hell and deciding what is the best faction. Now, I know with American faction recently coming out and everybody saying that the American faction is the best, but soon you will have to find out whether that is true or not. So if you'd like to see more tier lists on different topics in Gates of Hell, such as what is the best doctrine tier list, what would I rate the best doctrine list in the American doctrines or the German doctrines, and leave a comment down below what tier list you'd like me to do for Gates of Hell. But other than that, let's just get straight into the video. So we have four factions here that are currently in the game. Ignore the last one. I didn't mean to add this thumbnail picture, but so the four that we have is the Americans, the Soviets, the Finnish, and the Germans. Now, so we have an S tier being absolutely best, best of the best. I think the faction is completely OP and they're undefeated, all the way down to D, as in they're absolutely rubbish, and nobody should ever play it. Now, I know there's only 4 factions in the game, and there's still more factions to come, but I thought this would give a good kind of start idea to kind of bring up the idea of tier list, and also for factions as well, and hopefully kind of keep updating the tier list as for factions when they add in more factions into the game, if that makes sense. So first of all, let's start off with with the brand new American faction. The American faction came out when the Liberation DLC came out, along with some other new German units. But the main point of the DLC Liberation was about the American faction and the campaign of it, and seeing how best it was. Now, America, I think, is an absolute god tier. I think America is one of the best factions in the game, but I do think the Germans and the Soviets are highly competitive as well, especially Germans with their new units coming in for the Liberation DLC. So in that case, I'm dropping it down a tier to A. I do think the American faction I still think is really OP, and they're really, really good, especially with their armor-wise, such as, the famous Sherman tanks, their artilleries, their priests, that have just absolute rate of fire, which is absolutely insane for artillery piece. And also with the troops as well, being highly trained and just overwhelming numbers for the Americans, and I think they're really, really good. But to us, I actually think, believe it or not, that Gates of Miniver Assault Squad 2 added a lot more variety to the American squad than Gates of Hell. And I know that's a big, big statement to say, but remember, Miniver Assault Squad 2, added like 10 different factions. They added Japan, I don't know why I said that weird. They added Japan, they added other factions, and they made the Americans really, really OP. And for that case, I would have put the Americans in Miniver Assault Squad 2 S tier. But for Gates of Hell, it's A tier, and I still think Gates of Hell has still quite a lot to add for units wise for America. So therefore, I'm putting it A tier, but I definitely think it's still top tier up there just now in 2024. Next, let's go to the Soviet Union. Now, the Soviet Union was actually one of the first factions that came out with the game, I believe, along with the Germans. And I think the Soviets have actually, done really well. Gates of Hell have not ignored the Soviet Union, even though the American, liberation came out with America. They have not ignored the Soviet Union. So in that case, I'm really kind of debating whether it is A or B tier. I don't think it's S tier because I think for numbers wise, I actually think Soviets have number advantage, because I think they're probably cheaper for the Soviets, and their T-34s 85 is really good. Their artillery, the Katushka, I think it's called, or the rocket artillery, is completely OP in that game, and I think it's really, really cool. But I don't think it is as competitive as the Americans. I think the Americans just have the edge over the Soviets, but I still think the Soviets are a really, really good faction to play with. I would probably recommend putting it for if you're putting it for beginners wise, I would put it up in S tiers. But if you want to put more of a challenge in and you've kind of played the Soviets, I would put it down lower tier to maybe B tier and try maybe the Finnish, which we're going to get on to now. But overall, in my personal opinion, that I do think that the Soviet Union is a close A, but I think it's B tier just because the Americans are overall better for troops wise, and for tank wise, and also for cheapness. If you're talking about for manpower and how cheap it is, the Soviets are cheaper, but I don't think they're as good as the Americans in producing, Americans being just a lot more powerful. Moving on to the Finnish. Now, to be honest, I think the Finnish is absolutely crap. Personally, in my opinion, I think this is probably the worst faction in the game. And this came in the Talvisota DLC. Now, if you don't know, the Talvisota DLC was the one before the Liberation DLC, and the whole big new exciting release of the Talvisota was with the Finnish faction. And Gates of Hell actually made the Finnish faction so realistic that I think they've kind of just neglected it, in the sense that, even though the Finnish didn't have any tanks of their own, or a lot of the tanks they had was borrowed from the Allies and was borrowed from the Axis, such as I think a lot of the tanks were German, I believe, so a lot of it was copied from, Germany in that time. But I just think, they were fighting the Soviet Union as well, and even though the Soviet Union got completely embarrassed by the Finnish army, I still think that this faction is completely just, is not utilized well within the game, and I think Gatesville could put more attention to it, because it's now been a good, I don't know, a few years, a year now I think it is, since Talvisota came out. I'm not 100% sure, I'll have to double check, and I just think it's very much, I think it's the weakest faction out of them all, and Gates of Hell need to put more attention to it, as new factions are coming out, such as America, and Britain I have a feeling will most likely will be next. They're probably just going to keep neglecting Finland, and nobody's going to play it. And for the beginners, I would avoid this, completely avoid this for beginners, and I would put it in D tier. But if you are experienced or good enough player, I would possibly put it up to maybe B or C tier, possibly even just squeezing A. But other than that, I would not really recommend it, and I would put it in D tier, personally, in my opinion. Next is the final faction. Again, this faction came out joint with the Soviet Union, with the Soviet Union faction, and this is Germans. Now, I think, actually, I'm not gonna lie, I think Germany is actually one of the best factions in the game. I would say it's on close par with America, but again, in my personal opinion, just for, again, units wise, for tanks wise, for power wise, I think the Germans just edge it over the Americans. And I know there's going to be a whole lot of explosions in the chat saying you're absolutely crazy, America is better than Germany, blah 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 blah. First of all, this is my opinion. Whatever you say, it matters, but at the end, I really couldn't give a shit. It's my opinion, and leave it at that. But I think the Americans have better. I think they have better infantry, but for tank wise, if you're doing tank on tank, I mean, you're putting up a Panther against maybe a Sherman. I mean, who's going to win in that fight? Or if you're a Panzer IV versus a Sherman, I mean, and I know there's different variations of Shermans. Which Sherman is it? I suppose I don't know what is. I would say probably maybe like the E4 or something, like on par. If you think of a Sherman tank that's maybe came out at the same time as a Panzer IV, the Panzer IV, then kind of roughly relate to that, and I think the Germans just outbeat it with the Americans. Now, for artillery wise, I would probably again give it to the Germany, because I have the Luftwaffe that has the rocket artillery, which the Americans don't. I think Americans do have rocket artillery, but I wouldn't say they're as good as the Germans, in my personal opinion. But again, I think personally Germany is the OP faction. It has its Tiger tanks, it has the Tiger II, the King Tiger, and like I said, with the Americans, Gatesfeld have not brought out everything yet for American faction units wise, and I am hoping that Americans will overtake the Germans, but just for just now in the current game, I do think that the Germans do edge it out over the Americans. So yeah guys, that is my tier list for what is the best factions. Do you agree on this list? Do you think that I'm right, and you do agree that Germany is the best faction, and you do agree Finnish the worst, or do you completely disagree and you think the Americans, are better than the Germans in every way possible, and they're just the best because they're America and they think they're the best when they're actually not, and that stands till today. So anyway, guys. That is it for today. I hope you did enjoy this tier list. Again, if you'd like to see, maybe a doctrine tier list, then let me know in the comments down below, because I did do a doctrine video which did really well, but I might do it in a tier list this time. So let me know what your thoughts on this tier list, and let me know whether you agree with what I have put in the tier list for the factions. But other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching, and Ostfront, and I will see you in the next video. See you later, and goodbye.